18. The Inventing Room. Everlasting Gobstoppers and Hair Toffee. When Mr. Wonka shouted, "Stop the boat!" the Oompa Loompas jammed their oars into the river and backed water furiously. The boat stopped. The Oompa Loompas guided the boat alongside the red door. On the door, it said, "Inventing Room, Private, Keep Out." Mr. Wonka took a key from his pocket, leaned over the side of the boat, and put the key into the keyhole. "This is the most important room in the entire factory," he said. "All my most secret new inventions are cooking and simmering in here." Old Fickle Grubber would give his front teeth to be allowed inside just for 3 minutes. So would Prawnose and Slugworth and all the other rotten chocolate makers. But now, listen to me. I want no messing about when you go in. No touching, no meddling, and no tasting. Is that agreed? Yes, yes, the children cried. We won't touch a thing. Up to now, Mr. Wonka said, no one else, not even Oompa Loompa, has been allowed in here. He opened the door and stepped out of the boat into the room. The 4 children and their parents all scrambled after him. "Don't touch," shouted Mr. Wonka, "and don't knock anything over." Charlie Bucket stared around the gigantic room in which he now found himself. The place was like a witch's kitchen. All about him, black metal pots were boiling and bubbling on huge stoves, and kettles were hissing, and pans were sizzling, and strange iron machines were clanking and sputtering, and there were pipes running all over the ceilings and walls, and the whole place was filled with smoke and steam and delicious rich smells. Mr. Wonka himself had suddenly become even more excited than usual, and anyone could see that this was the room he loved best of all. He was hopping about among the saucepans and the machines like a child among his Christmas presents, not knowing which thing to look at first. He lifted the lid from a huge pot and took a sniff. Then he rushed over and dipped his finger into a barrel of sticky stuff and had a taste. Then he skipped across to one of the machines and turned half a dozen knobs this way and that. Then he peered anxiously through the glass door of a gigantic oven, rubbing his hands and cackling with delight at what he saw inside. Then he ran over to another machine, a small, shiny affair that kept going but. And every time one put, a large green marble dropped out of it and into a basket on the floor. At least it looked like a marble. Everlasting Gobstoppers, cried Mr. Wonka proudly. They're completely new. I'm inventing them for children who are given very little pocket money. You can put an everlasting gobstopper in your mouth, and you can suck it and suck it and suck it and suck it, and it will never get any smaller. It's like gum, cried Violet Beauregard. It's not gum, Mr. Wonka said. Gum is for chewing, and if you try chewing one of these gobstoppers here, you'd break your teeth off, and they never get any smaller. They never disappear. Never. At least I don't think they do. There's one of them being tested this very moment in the testing room next door. And Oompa Loompa is sucking it. He's been sucking it for very nearly a year now without stopping, and it's just as good as ever. Now over here, Mr. Wonka went on, skipping excitedly across the room to the opposite wall. Over here, I'm inventing a completely new line of toffees. He stopped beside a large saucepan. The saucepan was full of thick, gooey, purplish treacle, boiling and bubbling. By standing on his toes, little Charlie Bucket could just see inside it. That's hair toffee, cried Mr. Wonka. You eat just one tiny bit of that, and in exactly half an hour, a brand new, luscious, thick, silky, beautiful crop of hair will start growing out all over the top of your head, and a mustache, and a beard. A beard? Cried Versailles. Who wants a beard, for heaven's sake? It would suit you very well, said Mr. Wonka, but unfortunately the mixture is not quite right yet. I've got it too strong. It works too well. I tried it on an Oompa Loompa yesterday in the testing room, and immediately a huge black beard started shooting out of his chin, and the beard grew so fast that soon it was trailing all over the floor in a thick, hairy carpet. It was going faster than we could cut it. In the end, we had to use some lawnmower to keep it in check. But I'll get the mixture right soon, and when I do, there'll be no excuse anymore for little boys and girls going about with bald heads. But Mr. Wonka, said my TV, little boys and girls never do go about with that. Don't argue, my dear child. Please don't argue, cried Mr. Wonka. It's such a waste of precious time. Now over here, if you would all step this way, I will show you something that I am terrifically proud of. Oh, do be careful. Don't knock anything over. Stand back. Chapter 20, The Great Gum Machine. Mr. Wonka led the party over to a gigantic machine that stood in the very center of the inventing room. It was a mountain of gleaming metal that towered high above the children and their parents. Out of the very top of it, there sprouted hundreds and hundreds of thin glass tubes, and the glass tubes all curled downwards and came together in a bunch and hung suspended over an enormous round tub as big as a bath. Here we go, cried Mr. Wonka, and he pressed 3 different buttons on the side of the machine. A second later, a mighty rumbling sound came from inside it, and the whole machine began to shake most frighteningly, and steam began hissing out of it all over, and then suddenly the watchers noticed that the runny stuff was pouring down the insides of all the hundreds of little glass tubes and squirting out into the great tub below. And in every single tube, the running stuff was of a different color, so that all the colors of the rainbow, and many others as well, came sloshing and splashing into the tub. It was a lovely sight. And when the tub was nearly full, Mr. Wonka pressed another button, and immediately the running stuff disappeared, and a whizzing, whirling sound took its place, and then a great whizzer started whizzing around inside the enormous tub, mixing up all the different colored liquids like canned ice cream. Gradually, the mixture began to froth. It became frothier and frothier, and it turned from blue to white to green to brown to yellow and back to blue again. Watch, said Mr. Wonka. Click went the machine, and the whizzer stopped whizzing, and there came a sort of sucking noise, and very quickly all the blue frothy mixture in the huge basin was sucked back into the stomach of the machine. There was a moment of silence, and then the queer rumblings were heard. Then silence again, and suddenly the machine let out a monstrous, mighty groan, and at the same moment, a tiny drawer, no bigger than the drawer in a slot machine, popped out of the side of the machine, and in the drawer there lay something so small and thin and gray that everyone thought it must be a mistake. The thing looked like a little strip of gray cardboard, and you've seen the picture that it just popped out. The children and their parents stared at the little gray strip lying in the drawer. You mean that's all? Said Mike TV, disgusted. That's all, answered Mr. Wonka, gazing proudly at the result. Don't you know what it is? There was a pause, and suddenly Violet the beer guard, the silly gum chewing girl, let out a yell of excitement. By gum, it's gum, she shrieked. It's a stick of chewing gum. Right you are, cried Mr. Wonka, slapping Violet hard on the back. It's a piece of gum. It's a stick of the most amazing and fabulous and sensational gum in the world. Chapter 21. Goodbye, Violet. This gum, Mr. Wonka went on, is my latest, my greatest, most fascinating invention. It's a chewing gum meal. It's that tiny little strip of gum lying there is a whole 3-course dinner all by itself. What sort of nonsense is this? Said one of the fathers. My dear sir, cried Mr. Wonka, when I start selling this gum in the shops, it will change everything. It will be the end of all kitchens and all cooking. There will be no more shopping to do, no more buying of meat and groceries. There will be no knives and forks at meal times, no plates, no washing up, no rubbish, no mess. Just a little strip of Wonka's magic chewing gum, and that's all you'll ever need at breakfast, lunch, and supper. This piece of gum I've just made happens to be tomato soup, roast beef, and blueberry pie, but you can have almost anything you want. What do you mean? It's tomato soup, roast beef, and blueberry pie, said Violet Beauregard. If you were to start chewing it, said Mr. Wonka, then that is exactly what you would get on the menu. It's absolutely amazing. You actually feel the food going down your throat and into your tummy, and you can taste it perfectly, and it fills you up. It satisfies you. It's terrific. It's utterly impossible, said at first assault. Still, just so long as it's gum, shouted Violet Beauregard. Just so long as it's a piece of gum and I can chew it, then that's for me. And quickly, she took her own world record piece of chewing gum out of her mouth and stuck it behind her left ear. Come on, Mr. Wonka, she said. Hand over this magic gum of yours, and we'll see if the thing works. Now, Violet, said Mrs. Beauregard, her mother. Don't let's do anything silly, Violet. I want the gum, Violet said obstinately. What's so silly? I'd rather that you don't take it, Mr. Wonka told her gently. You see, I haven't got it quite right yet. There's still one or two things. Oh, to blazes with that, said Violet, and suddenly, before Mr. Wonka could stop her, she shot out a fat hand and grabbed a stick of gum out of the little drawer and popped it into her mouth. At once, her huge, well-trained jaws started chewing away on it like a pair of tongs. Don't, said Mr. Wonka. Fabulous, shouted Violet. It's tomato soup. It's hot and creamy and delicious. I can feel it running down my throat. Stop, said Mr. Wonka. The gum isn't ready yet. It's not right. Of course it's right, said Violet. It's working beautifully. Oh my, what a lovely soup this is. Spit it out, said Mr. Wonka. It's changing, shouted Violet, chewing and grinning both at the same time. The second course is coming up. It's roast beef. It's tender and juicy. Oh boy, what a flavor. The baked potatoes are marvelous too. It's got a crispy skin and it's all filled with butter inside. But how interesting, Violet, said Mrs. Beauregard. You are a clever girl. Keep chewing, baby, said Mr. Beauregard. Keep right on chewing. This is a great day for our Beauregards. Our little girl is the first person in the world to have a chewing gum meal. Everybody was watching Violet Beauregard as she stood there chewing this extraordinary gum. Little Charlie Bucket was staring at her, absolutely spellbound, watching her huge rubbery lips as they pressed and unpressed with the chewing, and Grandpa Joe stood beside him, gaping at the girl. Mr. Wonka was wringing his hands and saying, No, 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 no. It isn't ready for eating. It isn't right. You mustn't do it. Blueberry pie and cream, shouted Violet. Here it comes. Oh my, it's perfect. It's beautiful. It's as if I'm swallowing it. It's as though I'm chewing and swallowing great big spoonfuls of the most marvelous blueberry pie in the world. Good heavens, girl, shrieked Mrs. Beauregard suddenly, staring at Violet. What's happening to your nose? Oh, be quiet, mother, and let me finish, said Violet. It's turning blue, screamed Mrs. Beauregard. Your nose is turning blue as a blueberry. Your mother is right, shouted Mr. Beauregard. Your whole nose has gone purple. What do you mean? Said Violet, still chewing away. Your cheeks, screamed Mrs. Beauregard. They're turning blue as well. So is your chin. Your whole face is turning blue. Spit that gum out at once, ordered Mr. Beauregard. Mercy, save us, yelled Mrs. Beauregard. The girl's going blue and purple all over. Even her hair is turning violet. Violet, you're turning violet, Violet. What is happening to you? I told you I haven't gotten it quite right, sighed Mr. Wonka, shaking his head sadly. I'll say you haven't, cried Mrs. Beauregard. Just look at the girl now. Everybody was staring at Violet. And what a terrible, peculiar sight she was. Her face and hands and legs and neck, in fact, the skin all over her body, as well as her great big mop of curly hair, had turned a brilliant purplish blue, the color of blueberry juice. It always goes wrong when it comes to dessert, sighed Mr. Wonka. It's the blueberry pie that does it. But I'll get it right one day. You wait and see. Violet! Screamed Miss Beauregard. You're swelling up. I feel sick, Violet said. You're swelling up! Screamed Miss Beauregard again. I feel most peculiar, gasped Violet. I'm not surprised, said Mr. Beauregard. Good heavens, girl! Screeched Mrs. Beauregard. You're blowing up like a balloon, like a blueberry, said Mr. Wonka. Call a doctor! Shouted Mr. Beauregard. Prick her with a pen, said one of the other fathers. Save her! Cried Mrs. Beauregard, wringing her hands. But there was no saving her now. Her body was swelling up and changing shape at such a rate that within a minute it had turned into nothing less than an enormous blue round ball, a gigantic blueberry. In fact, all that remained of Violet Beauregard herself was a tiny pair of legs and a tiny pair of arms sticking out of the great round flute and little head on top. It always happens like that, sighed Mr. Wonka. I've tried it 20 times in the testing room on 20 Oompa Loompas, and every one of them finished up as a blueberry. It's most annoying. I just can't stand it. But I don't want a blueberry for a daughter, yelled Miss Beauregard. Put her back to what she was this instant. Mr. Wonka clicked his fingers, and 10 Oompa Loompas appeared immediately at his side. Roll Mrs. Beauregard into the boat, he said to them, and take her along to the juicing room at once. The juicing room? Cried Mrs. Beauregard. What are they going to do to her there? Squeeze her, said Mr. Wonka. We've got to squeeze the juice out of her immediately. After that, we'll just have to see how she comes out. But don't worry, my dear Mrs. Beauregard. We'll get her prepared with the last thing we do. I'm sorry about it all, I really am. Already the 10 Oompa Loompas were rolling the enormous blueberry across the floor of the inventory room towards the door that led to the chocolate river where the boat was waiting. Mr. and Mrs. Beauregard hurried after them. The rest of the party, including little Charlie Bucket and Grandpa Joe, stood absolutely still and watched them go. Listen, whispered Charlie. Listen, Grandpa. The Oompa Loompas in the boat outside are starting to sing. The voices, 100 of them singing together, came loud and clear into the room. And we're going to watch a video for that. I think there's no sound. Oh, yes, there we go.
Listen close, listen hard. Little Violet Beauregard, this little girl, she sits alone. Chewing, 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 chewing. All day long. Chewing, chewing, all day long. Chewing, chewing, all day long. Chewing, chewing, all day long. Girls are chewing till at last. Chewing muscles grow so fast. While they face a giant chew. Every day, with one great tremendous cheer, we fight the poor girls' hunger too. That is why we try so hard to serve Miss Violet. Chewing, all in on. Chewing, all in on. Chewing, all in on.
And that's that. Okay, yeah, that's pretty much the whole thing. We'll continue.